webinar. If you want to start recording, Lorena, now's the time. Okay, again, welcome everybody. We're here to talk about the new Regional Agricultural Promotion Program. Back in September, Secretary Vilsack pulled $2.3 billion out of the Commodity Credit Corporation to be used in three ways. $1 billion for food aid. We're not here to talk about that. $100 million for Specialty Crops Initiative to help out the Specialty Crops Initiative. We're not here to talk about that. And then $1.2 billion was set aside for market development. And that is what is funding what we're calling the Regional Agricultural Promotion Program, or RAP. It is an export market development program, not unlike some of the other programs that I've mentioned earlier, MAP and FMD particularly. It's very similar to the ATP program, which I'll talk about in a little bit more length in a minute. We've been operating market development programs at FAS for 70 years. So this is something that we're very experienced in. And some of you on this call are very experienced in applying for and receiving and executing programs with these funds. But some of you are not. And this webinar hopes to be able to provide information to all of you. The point of the program is to encourage market diversification and to fund activities that diversify markets for U.S. agricultural exporters. It's been an administration priority since the beginning, and this program is designed to do just that. As I said earlier, $1.2 billion was set aside for this program. It will be multi-year funding. That is at the request of people who participated in the Agricultural Trade Promotion Program that Secretary Perdue came up with 5 years ago, or 4 years ago now, I guess, not 5. But the fact that this money will be available for 5 years for organizations that receive it is at the request of former participants. We're going to have multiple tranches. Okay, the first tranche, $300 million, has been announced in a notice of funding opportunity, which I'll discuss here momentarily. And the application period for that first tranche of $300 million closes on February 2nd, Groundhog Day 2024. The program features a brand promotion component. It's not just a generic program. FMD is a generic program. The market access program features a branded component, and the agricultural trade promotion program featured one as well. More details on the program, and this will go on as long as the program goes on, can be found on the FAS website, excuse me, at the link that you see there. If you go on the FAS website and click programs, you'll find the Regional Agricultural Promotion Program. At that spot, you can find regulations. You can find the final rule that I'll talk about. You can find a link to the NOFO. You can find links to all of the program notices that have already been issued that will help govern the program that are referenced in the regulations. So I encourage you to go there. Hopefully, after this webinar is over, at some point in the next week or so, we'll be able to post some Q&A that came out of this session as well. Next slide, please. Okay, the RAP regulations. The RAP regulations were put into place by a final rule that was published in the Federal Register on November 17th. They are an amendment to the existing Agricultural Trade Promotion Program regulations. So rather than take the time, which would have been months and months, to start this program from scratch, we basically transformed the ATP into the RAP. The ATP had a couple of things that we've eliminated. Most importantly, we eliminated the requirement that an industry group show that it had suffered tariff damage from the unfair trade practices of a few years ago. And we've also removed some application review language that will reappear in the NOFO. The regs were published on November 17th. The 30-day comment period set a comment deadline of December 18th. So if you would like to provide comments on the WRAP final rule, you have until December 18th to do so. The amended regulation, in other words, the regulation as it stands after the final rule that was published on November 17th, establishes eligibility for participation. It prescribes cost share requirements, and it lists WRAP eligible activities and contributions. If you're familiar with our other programs regs, it's very similar to those. Next slide, please. So on November 29th, we published a notice of funding opportunity that sets out some very important features of the program. It notified the public that the first tranche would be $300 million, and it set that application deadline I mentioned earlier of February 2nd, 2024. It also projected a start date for the program of June 1, 2024. Now, that's a projection. If something goes wrong, it's possible that it could get pushed. I guess if something went particularly right, it could start earlier. But our expectation for now is that the program will start on June 1st. It projected an end date of September 30th, 2029. I mentioned earlier that it's a multi-year program. Funding that's issued under this first NOFO of $300 million will be in an agreement that ends on September 30th, 2029. So there will be plenty of time to be strategic in your expenditures. The NOFO also detailed the review process. I mentioned that the regs now have less about the review process than the regs formerly did under ATP. The review process is now detailed in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. The Notice of Funding Opportunity also named ineligible markets, which is a key feature of this program, and it established emphasized regions. And I'll explain some of that here momentarily. An important question that I know a lot of you have is what happens next, where we've got a NOFO out for $300 million, but a program of $1.2 billion. We anticipate that the next announcement of WRAP funding would coincide with the 2026 UES cycle. For those of you who know what I'm talking about, the UES cycle, we announce all of our programs generally in March of every year, more or less. The next time we would advertise for funding availability under the WRAP would be in March of 2025 for a program with a start date of January 1, 2026. That's anticipated. We're going to wait and see how this plays out. Okay, this is new to us. We haven't done a multi-year program with multiple tranches before, but that's what the plan is. Next slide, please. Okay, so I mentioned that the regs establish participant eligibility. It's also mentioned in the NOFO. The program is open to agricultural trade organizations. For example, the U.S. Wheat Associates, the U.S. Grains Council, the Almond Board of California, what's another one? Ginseng Board of Wisconsin. State regional trade groups, such as Food Export Northeast, Food Export Midwest, the Southern U.S. Trade Association, and the Western U.S. Ag Trade Association. Agricultural cooperatives. I had a meeting yesterday with the National Council of Farmer Cooperatives. Agricultural cooperatives are eligible to participate directly in the WRAP. And state agencies, we have state agencies that participate in the market access program, such as the Florida Department of Citrus and the Alaska Seafood Marketing Institute. In addition to those, we also allow smallish companies to participate in the program. They can apply for funding through participants who are approved to do brand programming. So for example, the state regional trade groups under MAP and under the Ag Trade Promotion Program operated branded programs where they were able to, where they pass money through to companies that are eligible to participate. The rules for this program are going to be the same as the rules were for the ATP. And that means that smallish companies can apply. Under MAP, only small companies can apply, but smallish companies being defined as a company that is not more than 3 times the size of what the SBA, the Small Business Administration, has deemed a small business in that industry. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a very important slide. Someone who picks up the regulations and reads them, first of all, God help you, but if you pick up the regulations and read them from start to finish, you'll find that there are sections of the regs that are just boilerplate language that don't have a whole lot of meaning on a day-to-day basis. These 3 bullets look like boilerplate language, but are not. These are things that we have in some of our other programs, and we take them very seriously, and we do exercise our option to use them. FAS endeavors, these are verbatim or very close to verbatim out of the regs as they stand today. FAS endeavors to enter into RAP agreements covering a broad array of agricultural commodity sectors. This means that the program is not going to be dominated by large industries that dominate exports. Okay, this program is going to be available to small industries across the country so that everyone can share in the opportunity. Second bullet, FAS may give priority to organizations that have the broadest producer and affiliated industry participation. This is important. We don't want to fund the Illinois Kumquat Association to go overseas and compete with the Iowa Kumquat Association. We want to fund a national Kumquat Association so that there's a unified voice and that we're not funding efforts that pull the buyer in different directions. So we take this very seriously. Finally, FAS may require that an applicant participate in the RAP through another RAP participant or applicant. Again, this is important. A lot of times in programs, we'll receive an application for somebody who has good ideas and possibly indicates to us that they have the ability to execute them, but has no idea how the administration of the program works, as an example. We may well, in those cases, if someone applies and we don't think that they are quite ready to handle a program themselves, we may ask them to work with the state regional trade group or with an ag trade organization that we already know, that already knows the ropes of how to administer one of our market development programs. Sometimes these organizations can be incubated and they graduate to their own agreements. And sometimes they find out that that's the way, that it's better for them to stay with a different organization that handles the administrative effort for them. Next slide, please. Okay, the meat of the RAP program is which markets are available and which markets are not. To encourage market diversification, as I mentioned, a key point for the administration, the following markets are ineligible for RAP. China is ineligible, including Hong Kong and Macau. Canada is ineligible, Mexico is ineligible, and the European Union is ineligible. Those 4 markets received more than half of all U.S. ag exports in 2022. These markets are well addressed by the existing programs that we have now, and they're continue to be eligible under MAP, under FMD, under the TASC program, and under EMP if in China and Mexico, and even in some parts of the EU. These 4 markets also received a great deal of funding under those programs in the past, and so we're guiding people away from them under RAP so that they'll focus on other markets. One thing I should note is that USDA endorsed trade shows. There's a list of somewhere between, in any year, maybe between 22 and 27 trade shows that are endorsed by the USDA, those shows are eligible regardless of location. So if USDA is endorsing the Anuga show in Germany during the time frame here, that show is eligible because buyers from around the world, not just from the EU, come to Anuga to meet American exporters. Next slide, please. Other ineligible markets, we listed the 4 that have been set aside by RAP specifically to encourage market development elsewhere. These markets are also ineligible either due to economic sanctions applied by the U.S. government or by USDA policy. The Crimea region of Ukraine, Cuba, Iran, North Korea, Syria, Belarus, and Russia are all off the table under RAP. Next slide, please. Okay, regions of emphasis. Chris is going to talk about this a little bit more when he takes over. Proposed activities in emphasized regions will receive preference. So we've identified 3 regions, and if you propose activities in these regions that are fundable, eligible, etc., they'll receive preference over countries that are not in those regions. Africa being the first, Latin America and the Caribbean being the second, and South Asia and Southeast Asia being the third. There are countries that are not in those regions, but are eligible for RAP. For example, the United Kingdom is eligible for RAP, but it's not in one of those 3 regions. The United Arab Emirates, also eligible. Australia, also eligible. They're eligible, they just don't receive preference. We fully expect that we'll be funding activities in countries like that as well. And then finally, we're setting aside of the $300 million, $25 million that has to go to Africa. If we don't reach $25 million worth of funded activities after the first go round of the 2024 RAP, then we may well issue a second NOFO for the balance of the 25 million because we really want to encourage U.S. exporters to try to identify a good market or 2 in Africa. Next slide, please. All right, just kind of high level, the RAP, like MAP, like FMD, like ATP, is generally operated on a reimbursement basis. In other words, there's a cash flow where you pay for the activity and we reimburse you for it. We can and do issue advances from time to time. That's something that can happen, but generally the program operates on a reimbursable basis. As far as cost share, generic programming requires a 10% match. If we put up $100, you need to put up 10. It can be in kind, it can be cash, but you have to be able to show us that you met a 10% match when the day's done. Branded programming requires a 100% match. It's calculated a little bit differently from the way the generic programming is done. But if you undertake an activity under RAP in the brand program that costs $100, we'll reimburse you $50. So we throw in $50, and you, at the end of the day, will have put in $50 as well. Next slide, please. All right, highlighted activities. Slide's probably mistitled a little bit. It's more about just reimbursable activities. Section 1489.17 of the RAP regulations lists reimbursable activities. Read it. If you want to apply for this program, read 1489.17 and then read it again. This is where all kinds of important things are. 1489.17b is where brand and generic eligible activities, things that can be reimbursed under a branded program or a generic program, are listed. 1489C is where generic only reimbursable activities are listed. In other words, things that are in 1489C are not eligible to brand participants under the program. And 1489D is where non-reimbursable activities are listed. So if something's listed in D, you can't claim it for reimbursement under brand or generic programming. A few noteworthy changes. from the ATP regs, which again were converted from ATP regs to RAP regs last month. It's noteworthy to people who participated in the ATP that domestic admin has been increased to 8% of your total program. So if you have if you get $1 million allocation under the RAP, up to $80,000 of that can be used for domestic administrative expenses. This is for generic programming only. And then overseas office and employee expenses are also eligible under the RAP. They were not eligible under ATP because it was a one-time program. We expect this program to be going on ultimately for at least 10 years by the time the last tranche is issued in the future. Next slide, please. Well, that's it for me. I'm going to pass the microphone, so to speak, over to Chris Jaquette, the Acting Senior Director of Cooperator Programs Division. Chris, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, Mark. And don't get confused. I have the mute sign on, but I'm borrowing Mark's microphone because I'm sitting right next to him. So thank you very much. As Mark said, I'm Chris Jaquette. I'm the Acting Senior Director for Cooperator Programs Division, or COPD. So you'll see that acronym throughout these slides. Next slide, please. So I am going to discuss the review process, particularly three of the 5 phases, phases 2 through 4, which is the responsibility of cooperative programs. Quickly, phase 1 is the sufficiency review. That is when the application, once the application is submitted, the Program Operations Division, and you'll hear from Kurt in a few minutes, they will review the applications to ensure all materials are there and they reach the requirements for an application. Once the applications are reviewed and found sufficient, they will be passed to the Cooperator Programs Division for the full application review and funding recommendation, which are phases 2 through 4. Phase 5, as you can see, is the final review and allocation decision making, and that's by FAS leadership. So that, again, that's pretty straightforward. But let's dig in a little bit to these middle 3 phases of the COPD review. Next slide, please. So the following slides are going to be a little wordy. These words are taken directly from the NOFO, so everything is there. Since this is a new program, COPD management was very cognizant of building a fair and equitable review process that is that's fully transparent for all applicants, not new applicants and existing participants in the FAS market development programs. So in the NOFO, it's spelling all of this out, our whole process, hopefully very clearly, and I can walk you through that right now. So starting with phase 2, COPD management will assign a marketing specialist as the first reviewer for each application. And so what this first reviewer is going to do is kind of a 3-step process. First, they're going to look at all the activities, the proposed activities, and they're going to categorize these activities into the different markets that Mark had mentioned earlier. First would be the emphasized markets. They'll take each activity and put them into those 3 emphasized regions: Africa, Latin America, and Caribbean, and South and Southeast Asia. Ineligible markets, those 4 markets that Mark had mentioned, of course, along with the other markets that are also ineligible. If these markets do have activities put for them, they will be automatically put aside and no further consideration will be given. And then all other regions and markets, which obviously will be reviewed as well. After that is done, this first reviewer will then review each of the activities and rate them on a scale of 1 to 3, with 1 being the highest, 3 being the lowest. And I'll discuss the particulars of that in a moment. And then third, what they will do is determine whether each activity's requested budget is reasonable. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the first reviewer will look at each activity and give it a rating between 1 and 3. here you see priority 1 satisfies or exceeds all the criteria. Priority 2 satisfies most, but not all of the criteria. And any activities rated with a 3 would satisfy some or none of the criteria. And it is possible if the application is funded and the awardee would like to complete these activities or carry out one of those activities, there may be changes required to gain approval to conduct that activity. The criteria and used in determining the priority, its ranking of 1 through 3 is listed below. That wording is directly in the NOFO. I'm not gonna read it to you, but you can find that in the NOFO if needed. Next slide, please. All right. Lastly, the first reviewer will review each of the proposed activities' corresponding budget, and then determine if that amount is reasonable based on these considerations. If the amount requested is determined to be unreasonable, the first reviewer will propose a reasonable revised budget. It's very possible that all activities will be determined to have a reasonable budget and nothing would change in the requested. But if the reviewer, based upon their expertise and their experience working with these programs, sees a budget that is deemed unreasonable, they will propose a new amount, and that is the budget that will be considered in the funding recommendation. Next slide, please. Okay, once phase 2 is complete, phase 3 will begin, and COPD management will assign a second reviewer to each application. And this second reviewer will be a different marketing specialist from the first reviewer that looked at the application in phase 2. And this second reviewer will be looking at the applications for different criteria and giving them ratings on separate issues. But they will also be informed by the review in phase 2. So the second reviewer will review the application and determine the application score by using criteria in 2 primary categories: the program strategic planning, which is worth total of 40 possible points, and then program management and implementation, which is 60 of possible points. So that is a 100-point total. And on the next slide, I'll show you the breakdown of each of those. Once they have completed their review and score, they will give a final determination whether to fund or not fund the application. This would be based upon their review, the score, all of the information they've received on the application. And finally, they will also have an opportunity in their review to provide their expertise and evaluation on the project success and everything and the reasonable budgets established in phase 2. So they will inform COPD management of their thoughts as well. Next slide. Here is the review sheet, the scoring sheet for those 2 areas, the program strategic planning and program management implementation. Again, this is also listed in the NOFO with the point ranges that will be given. One area I wanted to point out is the diversity, equity, and inclusion section. This is new to our applications, but for this, applicants will be evaluated based on the extent to which they show consideration of diversity, equity, and inclusion in program design and implementation, reflecting broad effort to grow export opportunities for diverse stakeholders, including gender, ethnic, and geographic diversity, historically underserved groups, and veterans, and demonstrating commitment to equity and accessibility of its programs. For this, the application, the RAP application we are adding a specific section, and Kurt will talk about it specifically where that is on the application. So applicants will be able to supply a written statement, a summary of the diversity, equity, and inclusion for their entire strategy. This would be not something that needs to be included per activity or anything like that. It would be an overall statement. So I just wanted to draw attention to that. Next slide, please. And finally, we come to phase 4, and this is the funding recommendation. And this part is done primarily by the COPD management, myself, currently myself, Zach Henderson and Nancy Hubble are the other directors within COPD. And one thing I want to make clear is, you know, we are active throughout the review process. We're providing guidance and talking with the marketing specialists throughout phases 2 and 3. So once it gets to us, the funding recommendation, we are well informed of the marketing specialists from both the phases 2 and 3 of their findings, of their recommendations. So how we will process the funding recommendations is we'll first review the phases in 2 and 3, and then we will rank each of the applications from highest to lowest, and we also organize the activities as they were rated from priorities 1 to 3. Next page, next slide, please. And then we'll determine the funding recommendations working through the applications, as I said, ranked highest, lowest score, and we will go through the stages. And this is where the emphasized regions come into play. So each stage we will go through, we will look at starting with the highest scored applications, starting with the priority 1 activities in the emphasized regions. And we will go through each of those and looking at the reasonable budgets and make a funding recommendation based on the reasonable budgets and the scoring of the application. We will go through all applications for that stage 1, the priority 1 activities in emphasized regions. If available funding remains, we will go to stage 2, which is the priority 1 activities in all other regions and markets. And we'll continue the same process, and we will continue to each stage until all available funding is exhausted. So if we get through stage 4, which is the priority 2 activities in all other regions and markets, and we've recommended the full 300 million, 25 million or more to Africa, we would stop our recommendations. It is possible we could get through all 6 stages without recommending the full 300 million, and that would leave money, and we would proceed from there. But that's how we'll proceed with the recommendations. Okay, and next slide, please. And finally, you know, at each stage, COPD management, we will be discussing each of the recommendations from the first reviewer and the second reviewer, but we may elect to increase or decrease a particular applicant's total reasonable budget for those, you know, and based on these factors. Again, all this is laid out in the NOFO, these factors and all the criteria throughout. So this is the process we have come to give the most fair and equitable funding recommendation to all applicants in the RAP program. And with that, next slide, I will turn it over to my colleague, Kurt Alt.
Great. Thanks, Chris. I think Mark is going to mute it. Thanks. So just a few minutes on the actual mechanics of applying to the program. So next slide, please, Mary Beth. Thanks. So you've heard about this quite a bit already, but pay attention to the RAP program page on the FAS website. Pay attention to the NOFO, and a new one that I'm going to talk about is the UES. But the NOFO, the second link there, this is a screenshot right off the RAP program page. It'll take you to the NOFO if you don't already have a copy. Mary Beth, next slide, please. This is a copy of what you'll see on grants.gov when you click on that link, and it takes you to the RAP NOFO. The NOFO itself is available under related documents. Please print it out. Please read it. Please keep it close, and please refer to it frequently. Everything you need to know about the program and applying to it is in there, as you've already heard. I will note on grants.gov, on this screenshot, you see up in the right there on the right-hand side, the big red button that says apply. And one would think that you click on that to apply. Don't. That is not operational for RAP. You will not apply to the RAP program by clicking on that button, okay? What you will do is read the NOFO, which will tell you that you apply through the Unified Export Strategy System, or the UES. Next slide, please. And this is what you will get if you click on that second link that was on the how to apply to the WRAP program on the WRAP program page on the FAS website. It'll take you here. If you're new to the UES, if you don't know what that is, and you are not already a UES user, follow these instructions and you will get access to the system, and that's where you will complete and submit your application. All applications have to come through the UES. Don't apply via grants.gov. Don't email them to me. Don't hand them to the FAS administrator. Apply through this system. Next slide, please. So you've heard quite a bit about this. Just want to remind again, because it is important. A few prerequisites. This is not an exhaustive list. Just a couple of reminders. If you want to apply to WRAP, you must be active already. By the time of application, you must have an active registration in the system for award management. That goes for all federal awards. WRAP is no different. Eligible entity types, just want to reinforce once more the 4 eligible entity types that can apply to the program. Mark went through them. They're in the NOFO. They're in the regs. Please pay attention. For example, for-profit enterprises are not eligible to apply to the program. Family farms are not eligible to apply to the program directly. Colleges and universities, not eligible to apply to the WRAP program. Only those 4 entity types as defined in the NOFO and in the regs can apply to the program. The last one, promoting eligible commodity. You have to be both an eligible entity and you have to promote a U.S. agricultural commodity, okay? So you can be an eligible entity and you can have a great idea for how to improve agriculture, a concept that you're looking for funding for, to develop, to enhance, so you can bring it to the world. But if you're not promoting a U.S. agricultural commodity, you would not be eligible to apply. Next slide, please. And finally, how many times have you heard this? To apply, the application deadline is Friday, February 2nd, 2024. By that point, by 5 o'clock Eastern time on that day, you will have submitted an application in the UES. You will also provide to us separately a completed standard form 424. Those 2 documents, those 2 things, your application in the UES and a 424, constitute your application. Have those both completed by February 2nd. Now, we've got 2 audiences here. We've got those that are new to FAS market development programs, new to the UES and are applying to WRAP for the first time. Then we've got another group that is familiar with the programs and has already submitted an application. I'm talking applications to other programs. I'm talking to the first group right now. Those that are new to FAS market development programs and WRAP. In the NOFO, starting on page 8 and running for about the next 4 pages, there's a list here, and I'm showing just the beginning of it. There's a list of about 30, 36 different items that you need to include in your application, all right? Again, print out the NOFO, read it, and refer to it. This is what you will need to provide, and it constitutes a complete UES application, all right? Now, you will be applying in the UES. The good thing about that is that the system itself, by walking you through defining your target markets, your commodities, identifying constraints, proposing activities, you'll achieve most of this information that's required just by walking through the UES by the virtue of the way the system is set up, all right? But be familiar with everything that's in here so that you can address it and make sure it's included in your application. And if you need help as you're preparing your UES or looking to submit it, this is a screenshot from the UES homepage. Once you get access to the system, all the way down at the bottom, that instruction for participant, there's a help option there. Help and User Guide. If you click on that help link, it'll take you to a page that has guidance documents, has video tutorials on how to submit an application. The user guide that's here and available on the help page is 200 pages of everything you need to know about working in the UES and submitting an application. If you have problems or questions or don't know how to navigate the system, refer to those materials and they'll help you out. Next slide. So new applicants, of course, you'll see this in the NOFA. You're going to provide information on these elements as you go through your application. I'm talking to those organizations that submitted back in the spring a 2024 UES application, and you are now going in and amending that application to add RAP activities to submit for RAP. All right, there are 3 specific elements for RAP that are new and different and were not included in the solicitation this spring that you will need to add to your applications. The first one, as Chris already mentioned, the DEI statement. Next slide. The next one is an executive summary, not to exceed 2 pages in length, of your overall MAP strategy. And the next slide. The last one is an explanation of why you need federal funding and what you would not be able to do if you did not receive the funding, okay? So those 3 elements are required for all applications. So those of you that are amending an existing application to add RAP activities, you'll need to add these in. Those of you that are submitting a new application, you'll have to do the same. Next slide. Where to do that? So this is a screenshot of the UES. This is what the application looks like as you're completing it. The plan section's over there on the left-hand side. We are adding some new functionality into the UES in order to accommodate RAP. One of the things that we are adding is a RAP-specific info plan section. It will very likely be towards the top of that list of plan sections there on the left. That's where you will click on that section, and it will present you with 3 text boxes where you're going to enter the information on the DEI, your executive summary, and your justification for federal funding. All right. It is not in the system now. It is being developed as we speak. It will be deployed by the end of this month. So in the next few coming weeks, we expect to deploy this feature so that will be available. It will for sure be available in time for you to enter the information before you need to submit on February 2nd. But all both new RAP applicants and those that are amending an existing application will need to go into that section to enter those 3 items. Next slide, please. Now, entering activities for RAP. So those of you that are familiar with the UES, of course, you're familiar with the ATP program option and ATP activities with a program code that begins with an A. We are using that same functionality and that same program code for RAP. So it'll serve double duty, ATP and now for RAP. So your RAP activities, when you enter those in the UES, will begin with an A. All right. In order to make that clear, we are also going to change the tag on that program code option. Currently, it reads ATP. We're going to update that so it says RAP/ATP. It will still function, of course. There are some participants in our ATP program that are still implementing ATP activities from 2019. This option will work for you, RAP/ATP. That's where you will go to make changes to your ATP 2019 activities. The new activities that all of you will be proposing for RAP for 2024 will also use the same option. They will be categorized with an activity code that begins with A under the 2024 year. In future years, 2026, 27, 28, 29, however long the program goes, you'll use that same option. So when we deploy the new development, that tag will change to RAP ATP. It will drop, of course, alphabetically from the top of the list, probably down by QSP in section 108, but look for RAP/ATP and you can enter your activities. You can go into the system now and enter them under ATP if you wish. We're just changing the name on that to make it clear that this is where RAP activities go. And next slide. And this is the last thing, just to point out. By February 2nd, you're going to submit your proposal in the UES. Right now in the system, under the plan submittal option, there's a button there that says ATP plan submit. That's from the ATP program 4 years ago. We're going to use that same button, the same functionality. You are going to use that to submit your RAP applications. As part of the deployment here that we're working on, we're going to change the tag on that. So it will say RAP plan submit, just to try and make it clear that there's no confusion. But when time comes to submit your application, when it's complete, you'll find that RAP plan submit button, hit that, and that will take care of the submission of your application. And I think that is it for the slides. So Mark and Chris, I think we'll bring everybody back online. Lorena is coming on. I think we're going to take questions now.
That is correct. Okay, let's get that. Thank you so much, Mark, Chris, and Kurt. That was very, very helpful, very insightful. We do have many questions, so let's get the easy ones out of the way first. How do you intend to share a copy of the slides?
Yeah, Lorena, are you gonna read us questions from the Q&A? Is that
Yes, that's correct, and that is a question from the Q&A.
Here, that's right.
It was,
Oh, we didn't have it on. Okay.
hold on. We got some technical difficulties in the room. We're getting our speakers back on.
All right.
All right, so I will post the slides if you give them to me on the website, on the USADC website, along with this recording. And I suspect that FAS will also publish this recording and post the slides as well. Can we agree on that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, wonderful. Next question. I'm not going to read the entire question, but the gist is, how could we make sure that development of AID, USAID, or aid in Africa leads to increased incomes of aid beneficiaries and in turn, increased exports of US into these markets? And that is from Kelly Wanda. She says she has some ideas that might be helpful in that regard. Mark, are your speakers good now?
Yeah, I heard the question. I don't think I understand the connection of that question to the regional ag promotion program.
Let me preface with what they prefaced. There is an important nexus between the growth of export markets of the United States and the income levels of nationals of those markets. Interestingly, the U.S. has been investing in measures that should lead to increased incomes in developing countries. Where incomes of people in developing countries increase, there is a likelihood that the people in Africa will import more from the U.S., where goods are of much higher quality. How can we make sure that the development of AID or aid in Africa leads to increased incomes of aid beneficiaries and in turn increased exports of the U.S. into these markets?
Well, we have other programs in FAS that address address factors like that. This program, is to be used to try to break into some of the markets that, as they exist now, it's not an income development program, it's an export development program. So, one thing that we're going to be offering in the next few weeks, though, is we're creating a series of spotlight events where our posts around the world will do webinars similar to this, where they introduce their markets to anybody who signs up and participates in their webinar. So we have various posts in Africa that we're hopeful will participate in the Spotlight series. We also have a division or two in global programs that work on different kinds of programs that might have ideas to help people who want to participate in RAP leverage the work that they've done previously. One example of that is our Agricultural Economic Development Division that does work to provide economic development assistance all over Africa. That group is going to be participating in a spotlight to tell you about the work that they've done in Africa and in other places, in Latin America, in Southeast Asia, in South Asia, that might be of interest and might spark some ideas in people who are considering RAP. I think that's the best I can do on that.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Mark. Another question. Folks would like to confirm or clarify whether or not non-EU countries in Europe, such as the UK, Norway, and others, are still eligible.
Yes, countries in Europe that aren't part of the EU will be eligible under RAP. That brings up a point that I neglected to make. The list of ineligible countries, particular to RAP, okay, I'm not talking about Cuba and Russia right now. I'm talking about China, Canada, Mexico, and the EU. They're ineligible for this tranche of RAP. It is yet to be seen what will happen in future tranches of RAP. So, it's possible that the next tranche of RAP, a year and a half from now or whenever it is, actually makes some of those markets, 1, 2, 3, 4 of those markets available. The program can be malleable if that's what we think is appropriate at the time. So for now, those markets are ineligible. The rest of Europe is eligible, but the future could be different. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. Continuing on that same theme, is North Africa considered part of the Africa region?
North Africa is part of Africa, yes.
Okay, thank you. I have a number of questions regarding global activities. And so I will use Bruce Atherley's question as one of the many around this topic. For global programs such as sustainability promotion, should we do 2 contracts, one for RAP for eligible countries and one for MAP and FMD for non-eligible countries, or something different? What allocation method should we use?
Okay, this is Chris. You may see Mark because I'm using his microphone. So yes, a world global, I understand a lot of the existing participants use those regions in their UES. They can still be used, but I would recommend creating perhaps a RAP global or something similar, RAP world, that would be, all countries minus the ineligible markets. You could still have that global market, but we still can't reimburse you for any activities in those ineligible markets. So as it's defined, and seeing that you have global or world or however it's titled in your current UES, perhaps a new region specific for RAP. But yes, a world or global region is doable minus ineligible countries.
Thank you, Chris and Mark. This is a bit confusing, but I think you might understand the question. And it says, should we keep the same regions as MAP/FMD, for example, or keep the Western Europe market, but to only include the UK? So I guess they're wondering whether to keep Western Europe in the same regions as MAP and FMD. Does that make any sense?
I think it does, and maybe this kind of is a continuation of what I just stated. And as far as the regions, the emphasized regions of Africa, and that what the definition of these regions are defined by in GATS, are on our FAS website, the Global Agricultural Trade system that we use. Those would be the definitions of the region. So from there, you'll be able to see that North Africa is in Africa. So it may be beneficial with these activities to kind of look at those regions and define them in your UES like that, because you will want to make sure that any of the emphasized markets are included properly. I know that some current participants may define their regions differently, so it would be beneficial to look at that and make sure that you're including all the correct markets into those regions, or not including them into the region. So there is no question if there's an ineligible market in there or that. So maybe a Western Europe minus EU, or however that would be titled.
Just to add a little bit, early in the NOFO, in the section called eligibility criteria, is a description of how you can find the regions that we're using, and there's a link. There's a link to GATS. So I would encourage anybody who's interested in that to go back to the NOFO and try to use that. And then one other thing, for the most part, regions that have been defined by existing cooperators, I mean, that's for the cooperator's own administrative ease. So, if it's not generally to serve us. So if it's just a region that you've created for your administrative ease, then it's kind of your call how you handle it going forward. Just keep in mind that you don't want to make an easy mistake and make any kind of claim against one of the ineligible markets. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Thanks, Chris. Okay, related to the executive summary. Folks are asking, we understand that the executive summary will be an important part of the application. Is there any further insight into what is most impactful for us to focus on, and where should it be included online?
That second part, I think Kurt already answered. There will be that specific field added in the RAP specific info.
Mhm.
And then the executive summary, we're asking to be limited to 2 pages. Look at it as just that, an executive summary laying out your strategy. And this is going to be a big part of the marketing specialist review of differentiating, if there is a past application, what is being changed with RAP, or what is being expanded upon with RAP. So this is 2 pages of your opportunity to really knock our socks off. And we've been waiting for this opportunity to do this here, and this is how successful we're going to be.
Let me add one thing. In the review process, the higher you go up the chain, the less time someone's going to spend on the application. So as the reviewer sees less and less of the application, the executive summary is what brings it into focus for an executive. So I think that investing in a really good executive summary gives us the opportunity to really shine the best light on your application as we discuss it with leadership here at FAS.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Thanks, Mark. In the determination of the, quote, reasonableness of the budget requests, should we clarify the timeline of the activity implementation? For example, budget for 1 year, 2 years, or 5 years, etc. And what reference points will you use to determine the, quote, reasonableness of the budget requests?
Yes, I think the more detail, the better. Just that, if you just said we're going to do some trade missions, and that's all we see. Obviously, that's very hard for us to determine what's reasonable. But if you gave a specific number over a specific time period, that certainly gives more details and being able to determine a reasonableness. So I would think that, yes, put as much detail and time specific and those sorts of details. We will be looking at each individual activity. So, to be able to determine that and get those details, it takes a lot of the guesswork out. And the criteria as listed in the NOFO on under the reasonable budgets, those are, the marketing specialist is using their expertise, level the past history of the programs and that. So that's how they will determine the reasonableness. Again, it's possible an applicant could have completely 100% reasonable budgets and nothing changes. This is just a way to limit any oversubscription that is from unreasonable requests.
Okay, thank you. All right, now regarding the nuts and bolts of the application review, will the scoring rubric be used for each individual activity or for the overall proposal of multiple activities from a given applicant?
The scoring rubric as if I'm understanding the program strategic planning and program management and implementation, the 100-point scoring rubric would be for the overall application. Each activity is getting rated 1, 2, 3. If I'm understanding the question correctly.
Yes, I think that is it. And there's a related question as to you mentioned a second reviewer. Who will the second reviewer be? A different marketing specialist in the cooperator programs division or somebody entirely different?
Yes, all those reviewers, the first and second reviewer will be marketing specialists within cooperative programs division. It just will not be the same serving on the same application. John Doe will be the first reviewer for applicant X, and then John Doe will not be the second reviewer for applicant X, but they will be the second reviewer for applicant Z.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chris. Regarding DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is the DEI bid referencing the diversity of exporters or of buyers in foreign markets? And related to that, will the DEI statement be in a specific section of the UES application or something we need to reference in our executive summary? So the first one is related to whether it applies to exporters or buyers in foreign markets and where it should be included in the application.
All right, so the DEI statement is about creating opportunities, what your industry, what your organization is doing to create opportunities for previously underserved communities, as an example. It's not the only thing it is, but it certainly would include something like that. It's not about target audiences. It's about how your organization serves the community of your industry. So, in the demographics of any farming industry is going to be different from the others, but each of the industries should have be able to describe what they do to make sure that they're inclusive when they plan, when they execute, in all of the things that they do, when they have meetings. How are you inclusive when you make decisions on what you're going to do with your program funds, things like that. And then, as Kurt mentioned, I think there's going to be a special section, just like there is for the executive summary, for you to put in your DEI information. So that'll be really obvious before the time that the applications due. There'll be a specific area of the application for that. It does not need to be a separate part of the executive summary, although we would welcome it to be, repeated there as appropriate. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Okay, let's see. Regarding the July-June groups, will July-June MAP program year participants have the opportunity to align RAP program year in the same timeline with regard to financial and reporting deadlines? This was a challenge we faced with ATP.
Well, let me say this. We haven't talked about it. It's not an issue for the first tranche of RAP because it's June 1 isn't anybody's start date. So there's no benefit or detriment to being a January 1 or a July 1 starter when it comes to MAP. We'll give it some consideration between now and March of 2025 when we're announcing the 2026 RAP. I had not been part of a discussion about that. Kurt or Chris, had you guys talked about it? We'll take that up as something we need to resolve before that date comes.
Okay, great, thank you.
So right. So because it's a 5-year program, which is similar to ATP, which is threw me off a little bit, because it's a 5-year program, there's not like a 1 year, the money's there and it can be used over that 5-year period. So people can align things as they see fit, but they won't have to close down their 2024 program and start up a 2025 program. It's not going to work like that.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Next question. Will unused funds from year to year be rolled to the following year as you did with ATP? And can we assume that the unspent funds will be taken into consideration when FAS is making allocation reviews for the following year?
Right. So similar to the last point that I made, that in ATP, we didn't really carry it over from year to year. It was just there the whole time, right? We didn't say am I right or am I wrong about that? We didn't do addition. We did. Okay. So we issued continuation letters. We may do that here, but we didn't like identify carryover and say, okay, this year you can have that much to spend. We just said, keep going. And so I think that's similar here. There's not going to be a stopping point at which we recalculate what's left over and reissue a new funding level. That said, we will be tracking expenditures, and it's a $300 million program. If we issue somebody a $10 million agreement, and after a year and a half they've only spent $140,000, well then we'll be very hesitant to issue a sizable second agreement, if they have a significant amount of money left. We're going to be looking at expenditure rates, just not the same way that we do it in MAP and FMD. Thanks.
Can I add, Mark, that we don't envision that the money issued under RAP Tranche 1 in those agreements would roll over to agreements issued under Tranche 2, 3, or 5. That money will stay in your 2024 RAP agreement until September 30th, 29, or until you spend it all. If you don't spend it all by September 30th, 2029, and there's money left over, it vanishes. It disappears. You lose the ability to spend it. So you'll keep by year, by RAP tranche, they will stay distinct.
Thank you, Kurt. Thank you, Mark. The next question or set of questions are regarding branding versus generic. So I'll lump a couple of these together. The first one is related to state branding, such as California raisins or California prunes or some other California product. Are those considered still generic, or are those branded products?
That kind of branding is generic under the program.
Okay, thank you.
For-
And
Branded basically means a single company or a single cooperative.
okay, and can generic program groups formally request to slightly lower their program year 2024 MAP promised contribution percentage, which was submitted before RAP was announced, in order to meet the 10% RAP contribution requirement?
If someone would like to make a request like that, I'd ask them to submit a request on their letterhead in writing to me.
Okay, so those particular requests should be submitted in writing, addressed to you and emailed to you. Is that correct?
It can be emailed to me, but I'd like to actually see a signed letter on letterhead.
Okay, all right, thank you. There's a question about the regional groups, and I suspect their members. Will the regional groups such as SUSTA, WSATA, and so forth be sending us the application like they did for ATP, and all the claims will go through their office? Is that the way this process will work with RAP?
I don't, not knowing who asked the question, I will, if there's
Brian Schroeder.
a company, or if it's a company or a cooperative,
Mhm.
then they would submit, that's a brand participant through a state regional. The state regional will take in claims the way they define in their branded program. They have to submit a branded program plan for us to review. And so whatever they submit in that branded program plan that we approve becomes how they operate the program. So until we see that program plan, I mean, they could make an adjustment and run this program differently from how they run MAP. It's not our call, it's their call.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Next question. I understand that we need to create new constraints and activities for RAP, but do we need to create new market assessments for RAP, or can we use our existing market assessments that we did for MAP?
I mean, this is Chris. I would think that, that depends on you. If your RAP strategy is drastically changing or has changed, but the market assessments, this is and again, this is to the groups that have submitted a 2024 UES. If that market assessment is still valid, it could remain. But you're having an opportunity to edit as needed for a new strategy.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that, it's a bigger program, and it's a program that has eliminated some significant markets. Someone might be asking for, 15 times what they've received in the past for a specific market. And so their market assessment as it exists, might not support that. They may need to have done, additional homework and have a market assessment that reflects that. Or maybe, like Chris said, if they determine that it's appropriate, then it can stand.
And I would just add as well, it would be probably beneficial to flag that for the marketing specialist if the market assessment has changed. So they are sure to look at that.
Okay, thank you. Next question. If we utilize RAP funding in a market we have a current MAP program in, can we use the same international marketing representative who executes our MAP program in that country to execute the RAP program without doing a new request for proposal, a new RFP?
So RAP will require of successful applicants, new contracting, fraud and brand procedures, just like ATP and just like MAP. So all applicants, all recipients under RAP will need to submit contracting procedures to FAS for review and approval that define how you're going to spend your RAP funds, and you will need to follow those procedures. So if the procedures that you submit to us for RAP say that we will issue an RFP for all awards over $35,000 or whatever, then you need to do that. A failure to do that would be a failure of your presented procedures, contracting procedures. Now, we've got now 3 funding streams that require these same documents: MAP, ATP, and now RAP. One thing that we've talked about, and we talked about this recently, was the concept of developing generic, FAS market development wide procedures that govern your expenditure of all FAS market development dollars that require a procedures document. So you're not specifying this is what we'll do for MAP, ATP, and RAP. Say this is what we'll do for any program that requires us to follow procedures. We're going to follow the same thing for all of them. If an organization submits documents like that, and it's and it says here's how we're going to handle our market development dollars, then as long as you follow those procedures, it's okay. That will help you down the road. But I think with a new funding stream of RAP, I think it's going to be important that you follow your contracting procedures, which I think is going to require new RFPs and new decision-making processes for all RAP agreements. But follow your procedures and do what it says there.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to switch a bit to what looks like new potential applicants to get some of their questions answered. Let's see, just bear with me. Okay, so this isn't a new applicant, but I think this would be helpful. Is the preference for RAP applications to be regional applications rather than market specific or not?
There's no preference that it be a regional application. We're looking at specific regions where we think we've got an opportunity to increase investment and increase the focus of market development. But we're also well aware that every market is different from its neighbor. And then in some cases, you might be able to do some sort of regional activities. And in some cases, a regional activity would be the last thing you'd want to do. So we're not requiring that it be proposed in a regional manner. We're just dividing the world up into regions where we think investment could be increased. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Proceeding with questions that seem to come from potential new applicants. About how long of a proposal are you seeking for MAP activities? For example, 5 pages, 20, 25 pages? What do you have any suggestions?
I think the UES kind of determines the length in that regard. There are required sections within the system. There is no minimum or maximum per se. But I think the detailed answers for the required areas of for the activities and activity descriptions and the market assessments and everything, if it's a new application, I think is necessary. So I don't know if I can give a minimum.
What kind of range do you see in a given year for a UES that covers MAP?
I would say we range from, I think, 50 pages to 400 pages. So there is a wide range. And again, it's because of the system and how it produces a document and there are required fields in there. So that's what that's where it's going to kind of determine the page range. So it's hard for me to say a minimum. I would say the required fields are the minimum.
So I think a new a new applicant generally submits a relatively modest proposal. You know, as just because they're new and they had, you know, inexperienced. So, you know, if we got an application less than 50 pages, I think, you know, that wouldn't be a concern to us, but it needs to be complete, and it certainly needs to address every field that's required in the system. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Along those lines, again, continuing with the theme of potential new applicants, should proposals focus on a single commodity / sector, or one destination, country, or region? Or can proposals be, or should they be, multi-sector or multi-country proposals?
Okay, so if I understand correctly, you know, the requirement, you know, you have the commodity has to be declared on which commodity is covered. So I guess I'm not completely understanding the question, but it would be a full strategy for that particular for that organization, and then their promoted commodity, be it the globe of their focus markets.
So we generally get applications from commodity focused organizations, right? If you take a look at at a list of who's been funded under MAP or ATP in the past, you'll see a list of mostly recognizable commodity or product organizations. But we also have organizations that cover multiple commodities, whether they're kind of, you know, organizations that are at the state level that cover several minor crops or something like that, or the state regional trade groups that cover just a super broad array of all kinds of things. You know, we can get product, you know, we can get applications in any number of ways. I don't know if that's helpful or not. If you need more clarification on that, I would say that you should, if you go to the to the WRAP page on the FAS website, I think there's an email address or two. There's one that's podadmin@usda.gov. There's another one that's copdadmin@usda.gov. And make an approach there. Someone can get back to, you know, you can have a conversation with someone who you know, who actually has time to you know, to engage in conversation, you know, and you know, maybe pull some additional information out from you and help you decide what's best for you.
Okay, thank you, Mark. So I am mindful of the time, and it's 4:32. We do have a number of other questions. We have 237 participants still online. I am happy to proceed if you are as well, or we have copies of all the questions and can submit them to you to provide answers in writing, and we can publish them along with the slides. It is entirely up to you.
Hold on just a second. Let me confer with these guys.
Okay.
All right. We've agreed to continue till 4:45, Lorena.
Okay, thank you. So you already answered this question, but I'm going to put it out there for the new people. Will there be access to a direct person in the Cooperator Programs Division to assist us with the applications? We can't hear you, Kurt. Sorry, you're on mute.
So we can certainly answer questions, but we cannot assist. That, you know, that's not possible for us to do, and to, you know, help and assist an applicant would be an unfair advantage. So any questions? Again, Mark mentioned the two email addresses, the POD admin at USDA and COPD admin at USDA, are the two email addresses to send questions, and we'll certainly provide you the most thorough answers that we can provide.
But I think if it's a system question, we can help with the system question. But if it's an application, you know, what's the best way for me to write this type of question, we're not going to be able to help with
Okay, thank you. More into the nuts and bolts. Are salaries and fringe included in the administrative expenses eligible in the program? And or are those also expenses eligible for match?
It's probably fair to say both. If it's a generic program, if it's a branded program, you know, salaries and expenses are not eligible. If it's a generic program, overseas admin expenses are eligible, including salaries. And as far as a domestic program, if you're not one of the state regional trade groups or one of the other two organizations in that category, up to 8% of your budget can be used for domestic administrative expenses, which would include salaries.
Okay, thank you. Somebody is asking, can we do research in the US? For example, bioproducts that is to be leveraged overseas? Would RAP pay for that research?
Yeah, if it's product research, it's ineligible. If it's market research, it's eligible under the program. But sometimes it can be a fine line between those things. I think if somebody wants to, get on the phone with somebody in POD or COPD and ask, a little bit more detailed question, we'd be happy to talk about it. But if it's straight product research, that's not going to be eligible.
Okay, thank you. Regarding trade shows in an ineligible market, can a cooperator bring a trade mission to the show or conduct an associated seminar at the show?
So if I'll pick an example, I used Anuga earlier. The Anuga show takes place in Germany. If a cooperator wants to bring a group of buyers from South Asia to Germany to meet with some exhibitors that are at the show and provide some other promotional targeting of those buyers, that's going to be legal. That's certainly something that we'll entertain. But it has to be from an eligible market. It can't be from an ineligible market just because the show's eligible.
Okay. Let's see. Will Cooperator Programs Division evaluate applications for a 5-year program versus a single year of activities differently, assuming the same market and that the budget for each year is deemed quote unquote reasonable?
We will not, if in looking at the activities proposed budgets, we will look at it as a 5-year budget as opposed to when we look at a MAP and FMD review activities. Yes. As I said, that is why it is beneficial to put, the detail, a little more detail in the activity descriptions if possible in that regard. It's much easier for the marketing specialists to gain that. So we're not going to look at a number and deem it unreasonable because it's higher than what we're used to, because we're used to looking at 1-year budgets. We understand, yes, we will be looking for 5 years.
Okay, thank you. Regarding measurements, what is the expectation of FAS if a participant is spending MAP and RAP funds in the same market during the same period? How would we report the gain export value and volumes in both programs if RAP funds, for instance, are enhancing an existing MAP program? And it says here, duplicate those results in both reports. Is that something that they would do?
Yeah, that we would look at it in more of an overall strategy successes. We don't look at MAP and FMD separately for those groups that participate in both. So it would be an overall market development strategy success, not differentiating between the two. This is an overall export strategy.
Okay. All right, thank you. How can folks request for a specific trade show that are located in ineligible markets, excuse me, to be added to the USDA approved list?
So there's a, excuse me, if you go to the WRAP website, okay, the WRAP page on the FAS website, there's a program notice that lists eligible trade shows, correct? All the USDA trade shows. And I think that there's a way, does it describe how you can reach out? There's a way to get shows added to the list. So if somebody says that there's a, oh, wait a minute, but that's not an USDA endorsed trade show list. All right. If someone wants a show to be considered for USDA endorsement, they need to work with our trade show office, our trade missions and shows division. I would encourage anybody who wanted to get a show considered for USDA endorsement to reach out to me particularly, and I'll put you in the right hands. Yeah. The list of USDA shows is on the website now. That memo is out there, but adding something to the list of USDA endorsed shows is a different process. So you would reach out to me and I'll put you in the right place.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Do we have a provision to do multiple group activities, such as those under GBIs within WRAP?
We did not build a GBI type of accommodation into the program. People are welcome to work together.
All right. For each tranche, will you be wanting groups to have different ideas for each tranche?
So the rules of the road for the second tranche will be in the second tranche NOFO, which we don't anticipate issuing until the 2026 UESs are called for in March of 2025. So, it may not be the same at all. If it's exactly the same as it is now, we'll tell potential applicants for the second tranche in the NOFO what we're looking for.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Next question. So the proposed budget timeline should be from June 1 to December 31st for calendar year groups for tranche 1, and that is obviously a question. Should the proposed timeline be June 1 to December 31st for for calendar year groups?
So there's there's no such thing. So the period of performance, which is kind of new language to those of us who've been around the programs for a long time, the period of performance is projected, okay, it's not nailed down yet, is projected to run from June 1st, 2024 through September 30th, 2029. So there's no program year. That concept doesn't exist in this program. So you're going to be applying for, for activities that will run for, a period of 5 years and 4 months.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Let's see, regarding generic and branded funding, do applications for both generic and branded funding need to be submitted separately, or can they be part of the same application?
It's the same UES, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kurt. It basically, and it's at the activity level when you submit, when you propose an activity in your 10-digit code, there's a slot. I don't know which one it is. Maybe the fourth digit is either a G or a B or maybe an A. It's been a long time for me, but you identify whether something's brand or generic in that activity code. So it's all in the same application.
Okay, thank you. And someone had a question regarding branded, and they wondered if they identified themselves as a generic cooperator, but were inquiring about branded programs. And it seems, can you clarify the difference between branded and generic, and whether a cooperator can do both and how? And obviously it's one UES, but I think this person needs a bit of clarification.
So, as I said earlier, a brand activity is basically, it's a little bit more complicated than this, but not much, is basically an activity that includes one company or one cooperative. Okay, so anything that includes more than one brand of either a company or cooperative probably fits into generic. So if it's a company or a cooperative that's asking the question, they're probably not eligible. They probably can't do generic activities. Now, there could be a situation that I'm not anticipating, and they certainly should call in if they'd like to provide more details. They should talk to somebody. But if it's a single company or a single cooperative, we would expect that their activities would be branded.
Okay, thank you, Mark. One last question. It's 4:45. I think this might be a simple one. Someone is asking if you can provide a sample of a demonstration project that is noted in the reimbursement rule.
You know what they're talking about?
It says, could you please provide an example of a previously approved demonstration project?
We haven't seen one in a while, but if I would like that to be submitted in writing, and we will endeavor to reach back out to the person who asked to talk to him about it. The person who's best equipped to talk about that is on leave this afternoon, and I think he would be happy to talk about it, but I can't put him on the screen right now.
Okay, great, terrific. Mark, I think we've reached the end of this webinar. You and your team will get a copy of all the questions and comments submitted. If you would be so kind and send me a copy of your slides, I'll make sure that we post them on our website, if that's okay with you. And we'll also send you a copy of this recording. I'd like to thank you, Chris and Kurt, very much for your time. This has been extremely helpful. This is only the beginning of this conversation. I'm sure we'll have more webinars about RAP as it unfolds. And we're excited about this program. Feel free to contact USAIDC or FAS. You have that information. I think it was posted earlier on the comments in the chat box, but that is it for today. I'm sorry if we couldn't get to everyone's questions, but will there be an effort to respond directly to some of the unanswered questions, Mark?
We're going to take a look at what came in. Obviously, it appears to be a pretty big pile of questions. We'll try to answer them as best we can. I think what we were leaning toward, without having seen the questions, is kind of posting written answers to them on the website, and then we would let you know as we post those kinds of things.
Terrific. Okay, well, thank you so much. I think that concludes this webinar. I wish everyone an exciting evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you might be in the world or in the US. And thank you for your time.
Thank you for helping organize it, Lorena. It's been very,
Our-
very useful.
Our pleasure, Mark. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon, everyone.